Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Dan Morley Boxing Podcast. Today, I am extremely excited to be joined with my guest. He is someone that I actually found on TikTok a few years ago. It's Frank Gilfeather, who, across the last few years, has absolutely blown up on social media with his excellent boxing content. He's got close to 700,000 followers across both TikTok and Instagram, and it's a pleasure to have him on. Frank, it's a real pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Dan. I'm happy to be here. Great to see you.
Thank you. So tell me about this. So I saw your TikTok a few
Yeah,
years ago where you was building that before you had an Instagram.
yeah.
And I am obviously in my 20s. I'm a boxer, but I love the old school stuff. So you were right up my street. And I thought I'd followed you a few years ago. And then just recently I'd seen you started posting on Instagram. And I think you had a couple of thousand followers. And all of a sudden, I'm just seeing you everywhere. People are talking about you. You've nearly got 500,000 now.
Yeah.
Tell me about your meteoric rise on social media.
Well, the TikTok thing was how we got started. I would go with my son Paul to the gym 3 times a week, and one day he said to me, "Show me how to throw an uppercut." So we have this wall-mounted bag, which I quite liked actually. It took me a while to get used to it. You know, one of these things that's against the wall. So I was showing the uppercut, and he was videoing the stuff. And he said, "I'm going to put this on TikTok." And I said, fair enough. You know, I'd never seen TikTok, but I knew about it, of course. And then it went well. And he said, "Do some more, you know, show us how to throw the jab, that kind of stuff." And there was a young guy called Gregor McPherson, who's a young pro, and I was helping him, showing him stuff. And then all of a sudden it became meteoric. I mean, suddenly we're 20,000, then 50,000, and then it went up and up. Meanwhile, the TikTok thing only started in earnest about 3 months ago. Not TikTok, sorry, I should say Instagram. Yeah, about 3 months ago. And we were trying that, we were plugging away with that. And I think 3 months ago, I had 172 followers on Instagram. And now I've got nearly 500,000.
It's
And
amazing.
so, yeah, I can't account for how this has happened, except I'm really encouraged and complimented by the level and the style, if you like, of the content coming back to me from followers, and that's kind of that's gladdened my heart in many ways. I mean, people are buying into my ethos of boxing. People call it old style, and well, it is, but for me, it's common sense. And so I'm really pleased, naturally, with the way it's gone.
Oh, it's amazing. As I already said, I found you a few years ago when similarly I sort of built my profile to aid me in the ring on social media. And similarly, it wasn't something that came naturally sort of, I just started doing videos on styles. And that's something we can come to later because I've seen you breaking down so many different styles. And I come across your account and just seeing it on Instagram the other day, I'd noticed you had a few thousand. I think I shared a video as well, and a couple of people said, "Oh, I love that guy." And yeah, I just noticed this, as you say, we've said it a couple of times, this meteoric rise. I've never seen an account take off like that. But there's a lot of people on social media. It's a bit of a double-edged sword because everyone can have an opinion, and you can get a lot of not con men out there, but people that they don't know what they're talking about, and they can
Yeah.
not manipulate people, but they can give misinformation. But with yourself, there's so much substance behind what you're putting out there, and there's so much passion. You're still moving as if you're in your 20s or your 30s. It's brilliant stuff. I love it.
Thank you. Well, you know what? You've hit the nail on the head here because I was like you. I started taking an interest in what other people were doing in terms of boxing coaching on social media. I was appalled by some of the so-called coaches because what they were telling their followers was wrong. And it really annoyed me. And I thought, well, there'd be lots of young kids out there who see themselves as boxers or maybe are interested in taking up the sport, and they're getting basically duff gen from these people. In fact, one guy in America contacted me after a while and said, "Look, I've got to hold my hand up, he said. I watch your videos and then I go and replicate what you've done
Oh,
on
that's amazing.
my stuff. And he said, so thanks very much. But the thing is, he's disappeared. I haven't seen him for ages. But I was flabbergasted to see
Mm.
lots of young guys, especially, saying, "Do this. This is how you throw a hook. This is how you jab." And I think, no, that's not. And
Mm.
so I was trying to just do my thing and not worry about other people. But I think the big thing for me recently, in recent weeks, actually, has been the other messages aside from boxing. The messages that I try to put over, that you're never too old to get to a gym or to exercise or to find a space to do stuff that, will keep you fit and healthy, and will give you actually greater mental health.
Oh, yeah.
Because the exercise and mental health go hand in hand. So I've been doing this kind of stuff as well, and the feedback has been phenomenal for me. And people are saying, "Oh, you inspire me." I've gone back to the gym because I've listened to what you've been saying. You've made me a different person. All that stuff, and it's so pleasing for me. And for me, that's what makes it worthwhile.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, both of us can vouch for how powerful boxing is. I mean,
Yeah,
it's brilliant how you encourage people to get into the gym. Even just, I think people would take inspiration seeing someone, you're 78 years old and you're bouncing on your toes like you're in
yeah,
your 20s and 30s.
yeah,
It's so much that you can get out of boxing. And as you say, like you're going about it in your own way, but your way is authentic, and people are screaming out for authenticity. And, as I've already said, I like the older fighters, and I see, especially on TikTok, Instagram, it seems to be a little more diverse, a little more seasoned. But everyone thinks Ryan Garcia is the greatest boxer that's ever lived. And I'll be like, no, go back. Look at Sugar Ray Robinson, Harry Greb, Sam Langford. I sound
yeah,
like a
yeah.
bit of a broken record. But people are out there screaming for that authenticity. And it's brilliant. But of course, you can't have substance without going and doing it. Let's hear a little bit about your career, because you had close to 200 fights as an amateur, didn't you?
I did, yeah. These were the days, and it's funny you should say that because, even sometimes more recently when I've been coaching kids in a gym, and they, of course, just look upon me as some old guy who's wandered in almost off the street, and I'm telling them, and I'm aware of this, that they're thinking it probably just the way I might have thought when I was a kid. They're looking at this old guy, 78, yeah. This is before the social media stuff started. And it's almost like, yeah, what do you know about it? Kind of.
Yeah.
These are 14, 15, 16-year-old kids. And I remember one night there was two kids I was trying to teach. Because I call myself a teacher rather than a coach. I think there's a fine line between the both. Anyway, I was telling them how to do something. And one of them said to me, "Yeah, how many fights did you have?" And I said, "About 200. And they went, "Yeah, sure, yeah." And I said, "No, you don't understand. In my day, you were boxing virtually every week.
Yeah.
And when you boxed in a championship, if you got to the final, that was your third fight of the night.
Mm.
Not spread over weeks to win the national title, ABA title, or whatever. It was on the day, 3 fights in the one night. So you did that with the district championships, the national championships, all that stuff, and they can't get their heads around this. So I can visualize their thinking about me. Mind you, since social media has taken me on, all that's changed.
Yeah.
Now, I used to be I was a TV presenter and reporter in Scotland, and I would invariably be recognised in the street or in shops and restaurants and so on. People want to chat to you, and that's fine. Now it's different. I go into a shop, and there's maybe a couple of school kids there, and they'll go, "Ah, wow, you're the guy on TikTok." Yeah, I was at a thing. I did an event the other night, a kind of after dinner stuff, in my hometown of Dundee, and we were in the little kind of so-called VIP room. It wasn't much of a VIP room because about six young guys, about 16 and 17, playing darts in the corner. And they suddenly clocked me. And I was with two very famous former Celtic footballers, John Hartson and Lubomir Moravchik. And they're standing with me, and these young guys turned and said to me, "Oh God, look, can we have your picture? You know, can we?" And they're saying, "What's going on?" I said, "I'll tell you about it later." You know, so it's quite a change. Social media has changed the world. It's changed my world.
Yeah, no, it is amazing. There's a video on your social media that I kind of linked to here where I think you're doing I don't know whether a seminar or just a session, but you're telling all of these young kids about how this man you don't know has followed you. His name's Anderson Silva.
Oh yeah,
Potentially the greatest mixed martial artist of all time, and he's following your account and not any of theirs. But it's amazing, that you know, having done these videos myself as well, because you know you've been boxing for you know your whole life. I've been boxing for over a decade before I'd even had this. So we're authentic boxing people, and then you know when you start getting an Anderson Silva. I remember the day Sugar Ray Leonard followed my account. I nearly exploded with excitement.
Wow.
It's just amazing, like how social media, you know, you can put in all of those hours of hard work, but just from venting your passion and your interest out there to people and having an authentic approach, you can really, you know, touch your idols, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, you're right, but you know, my kids get terribly excited because I'm not kind of fully focused on what's happening. Paul, my son, handles all this stuff for me, and occasionally he'll say, "Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, Rob Brydon's following you. Shane Mosley's following you. Rob Beckett, the comedian. Dominic Purcell, who's in Prison Break, he followed. Dominic Cooper, the actor, is following you." And my kids are going, "No, I can't believe this. You know, this is happening. You know," and for me, it's wonderful. So, and these guys clearly are invested in boxing. Why else would they follow me? Why would they kind of even view my stuff? And so it's kind of enlightening to know that there's a huge audience out there of boxing fans. They might not be boxers, in fact, most of them aren't, of course, but they're kind of clued in to what's happening in the boxing world, probably more than me, in terms of the modern fighters. So it's great. I love it.
Yeah, but boxing, I think more so back in the day, but it's been a huge part of society. Of course, if you get a massive fight now, people are interested. But similarly as well, I've noticed the amount of people that will either engage with the content and like the content or even drop a comment. You'll be like, "Oh, I didn't know they were surprised that they were interested in boxing." And even just one of the my idols when I was a kid is a little bit silly is Johnny Knoxville from the Jackass films.
Yes.
And he started telling me stuff about battling Levinsky and Harry Greb, and I was like, "This is my idol."
I've seen that one. Yes.
It's amazing. It really is. But I want to go back to yourself. So Scotland, when you were boxing, when you were growing up, there was some pretty good boxers around. I mean, obviously everyone will know Ken Buchanan, a legendary lightweight champion, beat Ishmael Laguna. Ortiz obviously fought Duran, but one that I think goes under the radar specifically, and my girlfriend's family aren't really into boxing before they met me, and I'd never really heard her granddad talk about boxing in a great amount of detail, barring Patterson or maybe Archie Moore from the 50s, until he brought up Dick McTaggart, who was a phenomenal amateur boxer, probably one of the greatest amateur boxers of all time. And I did a little series on amateur boxers and, you know, Lomachenko with the 400 fights and one loss. I was just staggered by how many fights Dick McTaggart had, 610 wins to 24 defeats.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about the scene around that time and.
Well, Dick's from my hometown in Dundee, and he's a good friend of mine, and he also boxed my two brothers. You know, many times. In fact, I think in those days, you know, when you were boxing as a youth boxer, you would fight the same guy maybe 6 times. And so he boxed my two elder brothers, Dennis, who's sadly dead. Dennis was a very good amateur boxer and became an Olympic referee and was in demand all over the world as a referee. And he boxed Dick McTaggart 6 times.
Wow.
And my older brother, Daniel, who was the British youth champion, he boxed McTaggart 6 times as well. But they were a generation apart from me, right? They're much, much older. Dennis is 9 years older, Dan 11 years older. And Dick has been around all that time. And when I came into the Scottish team, the Scotland team, as a lightweight, well, first I came as a featherweight, then Buchanan and I vied for that. We had a fight. He beat me on points. I moved up to lightweight because I was edging towards that. And Dick McTaggart moved up to light welterweight. And so we were teammates. We've known each other since I was a kid. And he's not in great health just now, Dick, but he's fine, and he's still got all these marbles, and it's unbelievable. I can remember it vividly, 1956. So I'm about 11 years old. And a guy from my hometown, whom I knew well, has suddenly won the Olympic gold medal in Melbourne.
Yeah.
So it's a bit incredulous, when you know somebody and you've kind of grown up with a name and so on. And then, of course, 4 years later, he wins bronze at Rome, and he wins every available title that was out there for him. The European one took a long time for him to win because, as he always said, and he's quite right, European title was harder to win than the Olympic title because the level, the quality of boxing in the Europeans was much, much higher than it is in the Olympics. Maybe not now because they've got a new system of choosing teams, but what you've got to remember is that the GB team had a representative at every single weight, right? So there were 10 boxers in each weight, in each team, and the Olympics, provided the best.
Yeah.
So Dick had 634 contests and was it 24 defeats?
24 defeats, yeah.
And you can't get and Dick was just sometimes I saw him lots and lots of times. Southpaw, 5'9.5". In those days, tall for a lightweight, an awkward guy, and sometimes not very beautiful to look at. Sometimes exquisite, depending on his opponent. Sometimes not so good because he was a southpaw. They're generally not great to look at, in my view.
They're very hard to beat as well.
Yeah, they are. They're so awkward. And he was a great one for tying up people and just being dull to get them to calm down, and so he could dictate the fight. Wonderful fight, a wonderful boxer, wonderful.
Yeah, amazing, and he's a name that I had heard, but until I really looked into those amateurs and the Cubans and some of the Russians, and then his name stood out, and I was looking at these records, and I was just like, whoa! I didn't realize he was that prolific in his wins. But you mentioned there the Europeans. Now, obviously, in your 200 amateur fight career, you boxed in Europe as well. You boxed in the Royal Albert Hall a couple of times, so I hear.
Yes.
Let's hear some of your experiences. Obviously, it'd be great to hear about in the Royal Albert Hall, but I'd like to know how going out to these sort of Eastern European countries and boxing the guys that were using that Soviet style, that in and out style. I done a video on that a while ago, and it really, really generated a lot of traction. People were really interested in that, since Dmitry Bivol these days uses a similar professional kind of adaptation of the style. Tell us some of your experiences from that.
Well, I always thought it was bizarre, well, not at the time, but looking back now, that we were all, I mean, as well as countries like Denmark and Italy and France, it always seemed to be the case that, teams would go and box the Russians, or they would come here, or the Bulgarians, or the Romanians, or the Hungarians, all these really hard teams, without giving it paying too much attention, from the point of view that these guys were virtually full-time amateur boxers, right? So, I mean, I'll give you an example. We went to Bulgaria, and when you went abroad, you boxed twice. You boxed on the Thursday and you boxed on the Saturday in a different town. sometimes against the same opponent, usually against somebody else. So we went out there. Buchanan was the featherweight. I was the lightweight. John McCluskey, my good pal, now deceased. He went on to become the British flyweight champion, professional champion. So we're all out there, and we're all about 18, 19 years of age. And we're in the ring beforehand. 2 lines, the Scotland team, Bulgarian team. So the MC would introduce flyweight as X against flyweight B, and you would swap over. And so at the end of the introductions, the teams had swapped sides. And I'm looking at this guy across from me, and I thought, wow, look at him. He's, 5'10", 5'10 and a half, totally athletic, wonderful build. And I'm looking, I said, I've clearly got the wrong guy here. He's a welterweight or a light middle. I start to look up the line, and I'm saying to our welterweight, a guy called Andy Peace, and the light middleweight, Tom Imrie, he was the ABA champion. I said, I think I've got your guy. One of you guys must be boxing him. And he looks at me, and he sees what the commotion is about, and he says, are you Gilfeather? And I said, yeah. He said, I'm Pilachev. It didn't mean a thing to me. We didn't even know we were boxing. And I said, okay. He said, I'm boxing you. And I thought, my heart sank. Right, I'm 18. And then subsequently learned that this guy was what they called a master of sport in the communist countries. In other words, he didn't work. He was a full-time major in the Bulgarian army. And he told me later that the team had been training 6 weeks in the mountains in preparation for this event. We were doing our jobs by day and training at the gym about four times a week if we were lucky. And so he beat me on points, but it was very difficult. He was just you say that style of the long lead and then trying to ping you with a... But it taught me a lesson. So we got beat that time 10-0, right? Nobody won. And I thought, right, this has got to change. Next time, we're in a city called Plovdiv, which is the second city of Bulgaria. We're boxing their second-string team. Still far too good for us. We were beaten 8-2. And Buchanan and I were the only guys who won. In fact, I tell a lie, in the first fight, Buchanan won his as well. And I'm going in the ring. I'm waiting at the bottom of the steps for Buchanan to come down the steps. And I said, well done, he won his contest. And he said, yeah, but look, and he showed me his neck. And there were bite marks on his neck. And they were bite marks from the lower molars, of course, because the gum shield was in. And what happened? He said, the guy, every time we were in a clinch, the guy would bite me. And he said, I complained to the referee, and the Bulgarian referee, just waved it away, But I went in there, and I beat this guy. And I thought, I'm going to have to find a way. And of course, I did find a way. Changed my tactics, shorter punching, closer range. But so you went to these countries and you think, wow, that was really, really difficult. But it was a great experience, because what we're talking about here, Dan, is in a football stadium, each occasions, and probably 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 people there.
Wow.
And so they were all big boxing fans in these countries, and they supported their national teams. And it was like going to the Royal Albert Hall in the 1960s against England, and then England next year in Glasgow, and then back again for the second time in the Royal Albert Hall. 7,000 people. And it's a beautiful atmosphere, because you didn't have what you have now in terms of the fanfares, the flames going, the music thumping, and the boxers making their way towards the ring. Everywhere was in darkness except for the ring and the lights above the ring shining down. And of course, in those days, the amateurs were all televised live on BBC. So people knew who you were. Amateur boxers, if they'd been around a wee while, were household names. and as much as footballers were, because they were on the TV virtually every week. Either it was England against somebody or Scotland against somebody. And it was a great time. It was so atmospheric. It was fabulous.
You talk about this experience and what amazing experience that is to take you further into your career. And you talk about boxing alongside obviously Ken Buchanan, who I have personally as one of Scotland's greatest ever boxer. I have
Yeah,
him right up there. I think he's so underrated. Of course, he would go on to have a legendary professional career, boxer likes of Roberto Duran in a very good fight.
yeah.
How come you never decided to turn professional?
Well, you know what? I grew up in the kind of silliness of youth in my 15, 16, 17, and it was always in my mind that I would turn professional. Because when I was a youth boxer, I say this with a bit of humility,
Mm.
nobody could beat me, right? So I was winning everything. Okay, had the occasional loss, but then I would reverse that. And so at the age of 16, I was given permission to box seniors. Now, seniors in those days were 17. Today, they're 19. In fact, I boxed for Scotland 3 weeks before my 17th birthday against Turkey. Stopped the guy in the first round. And I was going through all these seniors, experienced guys, one of whom, Freddie Owen, had won Commonwealth bronze medal in 1958. Now we're spinning on to 1961, 62, and I'm starting to fight these guys and beat them. So that gave me, and in those days I'm thinking, right, I'm going to turn professional. But then when I became Walter McGowan's kind of major sparring partner, and I was going through at weekends to spar with him, or through for a week to stay with him, train 3 times a day, and Walter went on to become the world flyweight champion. He was a beautiful boxer, terrific. And I'm thinking, this is me on the way now. And his dad, who was also his manager, he was kind of nurturing me to join his stable. He only had one other boxer, and that was Frankie Jones, who had been the British flyweight champion. And so he's having me through, and he's talking to me about turn professional and so on. And I'm kind of pushing him back. And I was at a dinner one night in Glasgow to celebrate McGowan winning the world flyweight title, and I had a load of professional boxers at the table I was at, and they included Peter Keenan, who was the big promoter in Scotland of that era, but he'd been a major champion in his day as a pro. And Keenan said to me, right, Frank, you'll be managed by Al Phillips in London. You'll box for Harry Levine, Mickey Duff, Mike Barrett. These were the 3 major promoters, the cartel down there. He said, and in Scotland, you'll box for me at Paisley Ice Rink. 5,000 people went to his shows every time. And, it was at that moment I looked at him and I said, Peter, the guy at this table who's wearing the mohair suit, drinking a Napoleon brandy and smoking the Havana cigar is the promoter, you. And I said, so I think I'd rather be in your position than be in their position. Of course, he'd done it all as a boxer. And it was like kind of that moment at the age of 19. I'd just come back from the European Championships in East Berlin that I thought, nah, maybe this isn't for me. And to be honest with you, Dan, I didn't like the fight. Now, it's a kind of vain thing here. But I would box constantly every other week. I would be sparring every day, sparring with professional, and I noticed the bridge of my nose was beginning to get a little bit wider.
I know that feeling.
Yeah, and it's beginning to get, my nose is beginning to get thicker around the bridge, and I thought, I don't like this. And I'm watching other guys who are being marked. I was unmarked. My style probably helped that, and I thought, I don't want to go down that road. I don't want to be a professional boxer who, after maybe even 20 fights, if you get that many, has achieved very little. And of course, you don't get big money unless you're a big name. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, it's one of the things I see because obviously on social media you see lots of young impressionable boxers, and they'll see Tank Davis, Ryan Garcia, all these guys making loads of money. But typically, lots of boxers and a lot of boxers have ended up penniless after their career. And
Sure.
most people will know this anyway, but the transition from amateur to professional boxing is just completely different. It becomes a lot more brutal. You have to sacrifice a hell of a lot more. Like you say, you'd had a very storied amateur career as opposed to me. And I started noticing my nose as a professional. Of course, you would have already had that experience, so that makes sense to me. I can completely understand that. And having already had 200 fights, you're more than experienced enough. But I wanted to sort of move along and start getting into. You got such a wealth of knowledge that comes across so well. Some of your greatest fighters ever. But before we actually touch upon those, there's such an amazing story. It is genuinely one of the most incredible stories for a boxing fan I've heard on social media. And that's you sharing a bag, I believe, or boxing on the bag next to the greatest boxer that's ever lived in Sugar Ray Robinson. I know you've said it probably 1,000 times, but I'd love to hear that story and how that came about.
Yeah, well, it was a surreal moment for me. I spoke about Walter McGowan, and I helped him. He said to me one day, or his dad said, next week when you come down, don't come to the gym, go to St Cuthbert's Church Hall in Hamilton, which is near Glasgow, and we're training there. And I said, why? He said, just come. He said, just never mind it, And I never thought, you're young and you're kind of, I wasn't kind of projecting ahead, but I went to St Cuthbert's Town Hall, and it's Church Hall, and it's kitted out like a terrific gym, full-size ring, punch bags everywhere, floor-to-ceiling balls, speed ball, the whole bit, And I never, I never even gave it that much thought. But now I'm thinking, well, some people went to a hell of a lot of trouble to do this,
Yeah.
and so I'm in the changing room, preparing to do my session with McGowan, and there was only about 4 other people there who were invited. So, as well as the 60 or 70 around the perimeter, but 4 or 5 other boxers in there, and I thought, this is pretty special. And I'm putting on my wraps, bandages as we used to call them, when in walks Sugar Ray.
Oh.
And I look at him, and he's got a black raincoat, and he's got a black mohair suit, and a white shirt and a black tie, and he was just sheer elegance walking in that room. And what you've got to remember is that Sugar Ray had been a dancer. He'd been a tap dancer, and he did vaudeville, and he was, so he had that rhythm. He had that elegance, that movement. He just moved like a beautiful leopard or tiger or something. And he walked in, and we looked. There was only about 4 of us there. And he came right over to me and he said, "Hi, everybody." He put his arm around me. He said, "Hello, I'm Ray. What's your name?" And I went, we spoke for 30 or 40 seconds. He was asking me about me, what do you weigh, how many fights you had, all that kind of stuff. And it was wonderful. It was absolutely, because he was the best of all time, in my view. And the reason I say that, and what you've got to remember is that the only way we could access footage of Sugar Ray Robinson in those days, and all the other fighters, was things like Pathé News. So when you went to the movies, when you went to see a film, the Pathé News would come on, and you would see clips of whatever the sporting event of the day was. And lots of times it'd be Sugar Ray Robinson against Randolph Turpin, because he lost to Turpin in the UK, and then Sugar Ray against Carmen Basilio. My goodness, what a fight!
Oh, what a fight, yeah.
Yeah.
What a year.
And so, but you didn't have access to that kind of thing like we do today on YouTube and these other channels. So to meet this guy, it was just absolutely gobsmacking for me, because I couldn't believe that this guy was here. And he was there because he was on the same bill as Walter McGowan. He was boxing a guy called Mick Leahy, who was a British middleweight champion. And he lost that one. But Sugar Ray was 43 at the time. And within a year, he was finished.
Oh, that would have been in the 60s, wouldn't it? Where he was taking a lot of his losses past, because he had that middleweight run where he would lose to the best, but then he would beat them in the
Yeah,
rematches. In his
yeah,
prime, I looked at his record the other day: 129 wins to one loss.
I know.
Phenomenal. I mean, just numbers that today's fighters don't even mimic. It come nowhere near. And like you say, like not only was he such an amazing boxer, but like just an all-rounder as well. But he just had such an aura around him. Even when you watch the old videos, the slick back hair, the
Yeah,
dancing,
yeah,
I can't even imagine. I was lucky enough to go to an event, and similarly to the story you said there, nowhere near as intimate because you were training alongside him. He come and put his arm around you. But I was lucky enough to meet Sugar Ray Leonard briefly, and just
yeah,
shake the hand that knocked out Davy Boy Green.
yeah,
You meet these people and you see how, they're just normal people, but the
yeah.
humility, someone that's put on such a high pedestal. But what a story! I mean, the great Sugar Ray Robinson.
Well, you know something, Dan. You touch on an interesting thing there. I believe that if boxing today, at the highest level, or any level in fact, had people like Sugar Ray Leonard as well, and all the guys who over the years showed humility
Mm,
and authenticity and a kind of love for the sport without this great circus and showbiz that surrounds boxing today, which I believe detracts from it. And it kind of, the hype is just, you feel like saying to the promoters, listen, you've done all this stuff, this bit about, the weigh-in where
mm.
there's aggro and the boxers facing each other for the picture, then they turn to the camera to get their picture. All that is, for me, old hat. And, my question is this: do you think that this kind of behaviour and all the stuff, the pre-fight preamble and all that, do you think that actually sells tickets? Now, you might tell me, yeah, it does. I can't see it. I would rather see the focus on the fight, on the event. Even to the stage, Dan, where it could be 20 minutes before you actually get the fight underway from when the fighters leave the dressing room and enter the ring. Even Michael Buffer and all these guys, the ring announcers, they take about 10 minutes to get through this stuff.
Oh, and then the national anthems. It's a half an hour
Yeah,
procedure.
yeah,
I do agree. And my favourite fighter in recent years, my favourite fighter of all time is Gennady Golovkin, because I've been able to, watch his rise from a complete unknown, not in hardcore circles,
no,
to superstardom. And of course, he was just such a gentleman outside of the ring. But
yeah, yeah,
I look at, Rocky Marciano, one of the most vicious fighters ever.
yeah,
You wouldn't say boots of a ghost outside of the ring. And, these guys are still so heralded, what was it, 70 years later after
yeah.
their career. And I do agree. I mean, you've been wearing T-shirts lately, and of course you got your gloves as well. Your the Noble Art gloves. Is that what they're?
Yeah, that was the thing. That was
Yeah.
I get you'll appreciate this,
Mm,
Dan, and so will your viewers and listeners who are into boxing. But
mm.
I couldn't believe when I was back in the gym and all these young guys are wearing sparring gloves or competition gloves,
Yeah.
and I thought, well, let's try these. In fact, a company sent me 3 or 4 pairs, wonderful looking gloves. They're
And
great
a
to look at.
beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah, great to look at, but I don't know what you think. But so I put these on, and of course I'm always going on about the thumb. I hadn't realised this. The thumb is attached to the main part of the glove
Mm.
here by a little piece of elastic. Now, I was brought up to clench my fist like that. How can you do that if you can't move your thumb?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what we've got now, even at championship level, I watch them. They're punching with the bottom part of the finger, right?
Mm.
Lots of guys can't punch with the knuckle part, which is what you're supposed to do. In amateur boxing, it's illegal to punch with the inside. They call it slapping. So you've got to punch either. This is what they call. It's the other. These are new terms I'm learning.
Yeah.
The American hook, that way. When
Yeah.
I hook that way, right?
Yeah.
But that's okay. And I tell kids, I don't mind what way you punch as long as you land with the knuckle part of the glove. But they're going like this. Anyway, I was appalled by this. So on the back of that, I thought, I'm going to bring up my old bag mitts, and I got them out after 30, 40 years, still good. And I thought, well, what if we could put proper padding on there, more padding, 8 ounce or 10 ounce for the bigger ones, and left the thumb like an old a bag mitt where you can wrap it around here. And that's what I've done. So I've brought it, and you know something? We sell them all over the world.
Brilliant.
With 65% in America.
Wow, that's I saw Frank Stallone wearing a pair as well.
Frank Stallone wears them. And so, yeah, it's amazing the number of people. I get comments every day saying, I've taken delivery of the gloves, I've had them on in the gym, it's changed my life in terms of boxing, how I punch. Now they're saying to me, now I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I do. I used to train with Harlem Eubank, who's a nephew of Chris, and he was always wearing the bag gloves, and it's becoming a lot more common. And I will put the link to your gloves in the bio of this video because I definitely recommend it. But where I was going to go on from there is obviously you have your gloves, which I wanted to highlight, but I've noticed the T-shirts you've been wearing where it says boxers, not influencers.
Yeah,
I was going to say, I think it's boxing seems to be changing, and I'm not a big fan of it. Whereas, you know, of course, I've had people refer to me as an influencer, which, you know, there's always a little bit of a holdback there, and I'm sure you're the same as me. But I'm not a massive fan of, you know, influencers coming in, trash talk. But I was going to say, I do think, you know, personally, I'm not sure about yourself. People know that we have substance behind what we're saying, and you especially are influencing people to get into boxing, to really get into what boxing's about, you know, the discipline, the respect. And I think that's amazing that, you know, although we're not influencers per se, that we're going to go in the ring and have no experience and, you know, do a backflip or something.
That's right. I mean, there are two types of influencers nowadays. Before social media, an influencer would have been somebody like me who's trying to influence, as you say, get into the gym, keep fit. Listen, I'm not telling people go and become a boxer. I'm not telling people go to a boxing gym and start sparring. I'm the opposite. I mean, I've had kids coming up and adults in gyms I've been at and said, can I get a spar tonight or something? And I'd say, no, you don't spar. Spar maybe, you know, 2 or 3 months down the line or whatever. Let's monitor how you are before we do that. Because people do not realise what it's like to get a punch in the face.
Oh, yeah, until you do for the very first time.
You're right, right. Yeah, and so you go in there and you think, oh, I'm a boxer. And you, in your mind, you're somebody else. You're Rocky Balboa or something. That's what you think. You get these guys. And then suddenly, whack, they get it. And then, you know, inevitably, you never see them again. They don't come back to the gym because they've got a wake-up call. But, so the T-shirt you refer to, which actually we only introduced yesterday, because we came up with this tagline, boxers, not influencers, based on what has been happening. Well, we mentioned Jake Paul, Logan Paul as well, other people who, you know, have tried the crossover. So what they are social media influencers who are looking for new ways, fresh ways to make more money. And the promoters are seeing, oh, you've got a ready-made audience. You've got X million of people following you. Let's jump on the back of your following and we can collaborate in that way. But if that's the way we're going, then what's that going to say about boxing?
And it dilutes the quality of boxing as well. You see world champions on the lower part of the bill than an influencer. And, you know, TikTok being such a major platform in which this influence is being pushed upon, kids think this is boxing. You know, long gone are the days where Ezard Charles will shake Jersey Joe Walcott's hand. You know, now they want people in each other's faces, celebrating when they're concussed on the floor, novices being knocked out. Yeah, it's a rocky road.
Yeah, you're changing the whole perception of boxing and how young people regard boxing. I mean, it's now, we mentioned it before, it's a circus, it's show business, and unfortunately for me, the top level boxers, Garcia and all these guys, are buying into that. So they're being encouraged to ramp up the hype. They're being encouraged to make it something more than it should be. It's two men in a ring in a battle of wits, power, science, technique. It's nothing else. And let's keep it that way for me. Now, I know that sounds old-fashioned, and all these young people who are watching this will be thinking, no, we like this. We like the aggro beforehand and the pre-fight press conference disruption and all that stuff. But that adds nothing. It doesn't make these people better boxers.
No, and I think going to a part we've touched upon quite a lot on different things is it's not authentic. You know, you have I think it's in your bio, boxing is a force for good because it promotes respect, it promotes self-confidence. This stuff is bravado that people buy into and people start to live their life like until they go to a boxing gym and get hit in the face and realise this is bravado. But look, we're nearly out of time, unfortunately.
Okay.
We've got someone coming in at 4, so I'm going to have to wrap it up really quickly. But just before we do, I could talk to you for hours, Frank. I'm going to cut short. I just want to know who are, alongside Sugar Ray Robinson, just with it really quickly, your greatest boxers of all time.
Well, you know, we've done the Sugar Ray thing, and you know why I love him. You know everything about him, but Floyd Mayweather has got to be in there. So
no doubt.
So I'm putting him at number 2. Now, I might be wrong. It might be that the guys from the Sugar Ray Robinson era, or even from the Sugar Ray Leonard era, might be Mayweather. But Mayweather has been a very clever fighter. Mayweather is the guy that I like to cite as being a master technician. He's not in there to do battle. He's in there to win with technique and skill and science and defence. Now, that's the key thing. Lots of coaches, in my view today, are not teaching the defensive part of boxing as much as they should do. It's all about aggression, attack, you know, kill each other. Mayweather was a classic example of how to hit without being hit back.
And speaking of influence as well, like that is one of Mayweather's positive influences on the sport. Lots of younger fighters or people that are getting into the sport look at Mayweather and they look how clear he is. Do you know what I mean? After 50 professional fights. And he, you know, before that, you look at some of the old school fighters, you know, you look at how they end up. I do agree. I'm really sorry to rush you, Frank, but I've only got just about a minute on the thing, but we'll move on to the rest.
All right, Joe Louis, former heavyweight champion, right?
Legend, yeah.
And Joe Louis, you've got to remember, held the title for longer than anybody in boxing history. Had more defences than anybody in boxing history.
Amazing.
Yeah.
12 years a champion, 25 knockouts and 20.
A knockout specialist. He was fantastic. I'd have to put Sugar Ray Leonard in there, I think, because he boxed it with that quartet: Leonard, Hagler, Hearns, Roberto Duran, and he was top level.
And he beat them all as well.
He beat them all, and that's why he goes in there. I'm just having a look at my note. Number 5. Well, you know the guy I have to put in there because he went through 8 world championships. Manny Pacquiao.
Manny Pacquiao.
How could you possibly leave Pacquiao out of that? 8 weight divisions.
And he had such wars as well early on against legendary fighters like Marquez, Barrera. Frank, hopefully I can get you back and we can go into some real details on these fighters. I've got the clock ticking down now, unfortunately. But yeah, I think Joe Louis as well. If you're going to show someone the boxing textbook, show them Joe Louis because he done everything perfectly.
You're right.
Brilliant fighters. It's so good to hear your wealth of knowledge, experience, and most importantly, passion. Just keep it up, Frank. I'm loving it. I'm loving seeing your rise. We're going to push to 1 million followers on Instagram. And it's brilliant. Honestly, it's so good to see you pushing, you know, boxing being a force for good and just benefiting people's lives because it's changed my life and I'm sure it's changed yours. Thank you and keep it up. And I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Dan.
Pleasure.